Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about why the United States does not have the right to torture suspected terrorists. On behalf of myself, Ofa, Alice, Jay, and Dorian, thanks in advance for listening. Here we go. First, I want to set a basic definition of what exactly torture is. Torture is any act with the intention of the infliction of pain or bodily harm in order to get information from a prisoner. This can include obtaining information such as a confession, an additional accomplice, or a punishment, or information about a future event, anything like that. So that's really important as we talk about why torture is not justified. Side note, I want to point out that the United States is not unique in its history with torture. Many countries have a history with torture or still perform torture on their prisoners. Following World War II and Nazi Germany, there was this worldwide abhorrence to torture, and there really wasn't an excuse for it, no matter when or where or what party was performing the torture. That kind of changed in the 1970s and 80s when governments started to label groups and people as terrorists. It started to become less taboo for governments to torture these terrorists. These were people that were usually caught during wartime, and most countries only use torture on these terrorists. But now a lot of them kind of regret that and call it repugnant. So I kind of want to start a timeline to talk about torture and how it relates to the United States. Torture dates back to 1962 to obtain confessions from suspected witches. That was probably used long before that. That's kind of when we first have it documented. In 1789, the Bill of Rights was passed into law, which included prohibitions on cruel and unusual punishment. In 1903, President Teddy Roosevelt publicly defended the United States military's use of water torture against Filipino detainees by saying that nobody was seriously damaged by what was done. In 1963, the CIA distributed an internal interrogation manual, which included torture techniques. This manual was used to train U.S.-supported Latin America militia at the School of the Americas between 1987 and 1991. So not only were we using torture, we were also teaching others how to use torture. In 1994, the United States passed a law prohibiting the use of torture by the military under any circumstances. That same year, the United States also signed the Geneva Convention, which prohibits the torturing of prisoners of war. In 1995, President Clinton issued PDD 39, which authorized the extraordinary rendition or transfer of non-citizen prisoners to Egypt, known for its torture practices, for interrogation and trial, so that U.S. agencies could gather statements and use them, and gather them through torture without breaking any U.S. anti-torture laws. So after 9/11, obviously the terrorist attacks on 9/11 changed a lot in the country, and the use of torture wasn't different. The expansion of technology led to the American public being more informed on what was happening overseas. And in 2004, a CBS News expose revealed images and stories of the abuse by the U.S. military of prisoners at Abu Ghraib detention facility in Baghdad. The scandal, photographs, and testimonies called attention to the widespread problem of post-9/11 torture. Although what happened at Abu Ghraib was not sanctioned by the government, there is evidence that the government-sanctioned torture has occurred. In 2009, the Obama administration released documents revealing that during a short period in 2003, the Bush administration had ordered the use of torture against 2 al-Qaeda suspects an estimated of 266 times. However, this is likely only representing a small fraction of authorized uses of torture following 9/11. So I kind of want to dive a little deeper into the Bush administration because that's really where torture gets talked about and where you have some inter-administration arguments on whether or not torture should be justified. And it's also right after 9/11, so it's when tensions are a little high. It's going off that. In 2002, during the Bush administration and the War on Terror, Deputy Assistant Attorney General John Yoo and the Assistant U.S. Attorney General John J. Bybee drafted a series of top-secret letters and memos about the legality of torture. These torture memos, as they would be known as, labeled the intended victims of torture as enemy combatants and attempted to change the definitions of techniques once defined as torture to enhanced interrogation techniques. So here you have a memorandum for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I'm sorry, I kind of had to make it small, but if you zoom in, you can kind of read what they're talking about. And then a memorandum for the General Counsel of the U.S. Department of Defense, both during the Bush administration. In 2004, Jack Goldsmith, the head of the Office of Legal Counsel for the Bush administration, withdrew many of the torture memos on the grounds that they were tendentious, overly broad, and legally flawed. Shortly after the withdrawal, Goldsmith resigned from the Bush administration because of the administration's disagreements with his decision. Following his resignation, the Attorney General at the time, John Ashcroft, reinstated that torture program. The use of torture in fighting the war on terror remained in place until 2009, when it was ended by the Obama administration because it was cruel, ineffective, and ultimately illegal. So kind of to expound on those three reasons, torture is cruel. Various government officials and released detainees have reported some of these things happening. So things like beatings, loud noises, extreme heat and cold, sleep deprivation, light, food, water deprivation, being bound and forced to stand in painful positions. These are all things that the U.S. government has done to try to get information from somebody. These pictures are kind of hard to look at, but they are real photographs of things that the U.S. forces have done in Guantanamo Bay and Abu Ghraib, which we talked about earlier. Some of the techniques like sleep deprivation and deprivation of like light, they're kind of talked about as a stress and duress techniques of interrogation, but I think these photos speak to the fact that it's nothing more than cruel torture. So one of the major arguments for using torture is that you can gather information that could possibly help prevent another thing like 9/11 happening. However, torture is very ineffective and can be counterproductive to obtaining information from somebody. Former interrogators, researchers, and scholars have said that the information obtained from somebody who is broken down and at their weakest is often unreliable, hard to corroborate, and sometimes not even understandable. There have also been studies that talk about the link between torture and the part of the brain associated with memory. And those kind of further the fact that, you know, when you're at your lowest, you're not thinking straight, you're not thinking correctly. So they're not very reliable for information after someone's been tortured. As has been pointed out before in this presentation, the United States has laws outlawing torture. It also signed the Geneva Conventions of 1949, which is a treaty, and that is the law of the land, according to the Constitution, and that convention includes prohibitions on torture. So it is illegal. But on top of that, the Supreme Court has also ruled against the use of torture in both Hope v. Pelzer and Brown v. Mississippi, saying that the rack and torture chamber may not be substituted for the witness stand. It's kind of, in other words, you can't torture somebody and not give them a right to stand trial. Along those same lines, some of the other legal arguments is that the use of torture is a violation of the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment and a violation of Miranda rights, a right to counsel, and a right to a fair trial. So kind of in conclusion, to wrap things up, when deciding whether or not the United States has a right to torture suspected terrorists, we must ask whether or not we agree with our government breaking its own laws instead of enforcing them equally and without discrimination like they're supposed to. And perhaps more importantly, we need to ask ourselves if that's how we as a nation want to be, and if we are okay with the damage that can be caused by torturing anybody. So thanks for listening. Let us know if you guys have any questions in the discussion, and we look forward to talking about it.